The next workshop that we have is Advanced Apologetics with Josh Brahm from Equal Rights Institute. Yeah. Josh Brahm is the president and co-founder of the Equal Rights Institute. He has worked in the pro-life movement since he was 18. After 12 years of full-time pro-life work, he launched Equal Rights Institute to maximize his impact for the movement. He helps train and support thousands of students every year in the pro-life movement, so we are so excited for him to be here today. So I introduce to you Josh Brahm.
Thanks. Oh, I got this. Good morning. Oh, we're going to have fun. You ready to do some philosophy? Yes. Before we do, let me tell you a little bit about what's going on in my house. So I have 3 sons, 10, 8, and 6. So yeah, our house is a pretty loud, chaotic place. You think the March for Life is chaotic. You should hang out in our playroom for like a half an hour with our sons and see what happens. It's really nice to be here. So a year ago, I was at the conference about an hour before I came up to speak, and my wife calls me and says, so your son William just found out about abortion. And he was 7 at the time. I said, what happened? So he said, well, he asked me, he's like, he wanted to know why you were gone. So he came up to me and finally, for the first time asked, he said, what does Daddy do? And my wife's totally not wanting to get into it, right? And so she's like, oh, he's the nonprofit director. Because what kid is going to ask what that means? And he was like, oh, that's interesting. But what does he do? Like, does he help people? Like, what? And she's like, well, you know, he's a speaker and a writer. Again, not wanting to talk about it. And he's like, But what does he do? She's like, oh, all right. So you know how women get, you know, they have babies in their tummies for a while before the babies are born? Well, there are some women, when that happens, they get really freaked out, and they don't know how they're going to handle it, and they think it should be legal to have a doctor kill the baby that's in her tummy. And he goes, oh, that's so rude. And so he's processing. And he says, that's inappropriate. And he's like, wait a minute, but it's wrong to kill people unless they're trying to kill you. Then it's okay. So he's already a philosopher. He's already making distinctions. And my wife's like, yeah. So he goes around the country and does speaking and writing and tries to encourage people not to do that. He goes, oh. So he does help people. Okay. And then he walked away. So that's kind of what it's like at my house right now. But I am today getting to talk about one of my favorite subjects. I started Equal Rights Institute with my brother Tim several years ago because we wanted to help pro-life people to get better at philosophy. Because there are some pro-choice arguments that are pretty lame. But there are some pro-choice arguments that are a lot stronger philosophically. And if we're going to respond to the strongest pro-choice arguments that are philosophical, we need to respond with more than just emotional arguments. We need to respond with good philosophy too. So I want to help us to kind of get up a rung on the intellectual ladder and give the strongest responses we can to the strongest pro-choice arguments. It's my favorite talk to do on a college campus. Some of you have been talking about me coming to your campus. I love doing this talk on campuses because pro-choice people come. And it's a great talk for both sides to hear because it's an anti-straw man talk. We're going to take the strongest pro-choice arguments super seriously. And I'm talking about how annoying it is when people misunderstand your strongest arguments and straw man them. You know what I mean when I use that term straw man? It's like when someone beats up a way dumber version of your argument than the one that you're actually making. It's super obnoxious. And so I'm watching the pro-choice people in the crowd while I do my introduction. I can see who they are. They've got green hair and they're staring daggers at me. Like I can tell. And I'm talking about, like, we're going to take your best argument super seriously and try to make sure we understand it well and then talk about maybe a good response to them. And I can see their defenses go down. And the protest signs drop to the floor. And they're like, okay, well, I'll listen to this. And the last time I did this well, I'm not going to tell you what campus because I'm going to tell you about something that someone said that he wouldn't have probably wanted to be a public thing. But I hung out with this awesome philosophy professor afterwards. a pro-choice philosophy professor. He came to the whole talk. He asked a question during Q&A. It was a great question. And we hung out for a couple of hours afterwards at this dessert reception, and we totally clicked. One thing, he was like, you would clearly have me pro-life in 20 minutes. You're clearly have better arguments. But we talked about all these other things, and he said, you're the most dangerous Christian in the world. Because this combination of open-mindedness, and you're so dang easy to listen to. Like, I felt great as a pro-choice person listening. It's like, you're dangerous. So I want to help pro-life people to do that, to be able to take the strongest pro-choice arguments really seriously and not strawman them. And it is really common for pro-life people to misunderstand bodily rights arguments because we are so used to talking about the baby. Like, there's this fundamental disagreement between pro-life and pro-choice people. Does the unborn matter or not? Is it the kind of human that matters, like you and I do? And so we're so used to doing that, and then a pro-choice person comes up and says, my body, my choice, and sometimes we kind of are like stuck in that mode, and we want to keep talking about personhood. But that's not where they're coming from. I was at Fresno City College several years ago. There was a different pro-life group that was going to come in and do an exhibit, and I wanted to come and kind of watch and see what they would do. I just liked watching other pro-life groups set up exhibits and talk to people, just kind of see what they're doing. And so I decided to come around lunchtime. I couldn't spend the whole day there, but I was going to spend, my lunch hour, a few hours, just kind of checking out what they were doing. But I walked on campus. I got there right at lunch, and so the area on campus where the pro-life display was deserted. It was like, that first episode from The Walking Dead where he walks into Atlanta and there's no one there. It was like that. It was weird. There was only I found the display. It had some graphic pictures on it and some information about abortion. And there's one lone volunteer, this high school kid, that had been brought to this thing. And all the the older leaders whom I knew from a long time ago, they were all in the cafeteria having lunch where basically everyone else on campus was. So I was like, well, okay, I can't do anything yet. So I kind of sat 50 yards away, and I just started eating my sandwich that I brought. Well, this kid sees me, and I'm the only heartbeat within, 100 yards of the place. So I'm fresh meat to him, right? So he comes up to me, he's like, hey, what do you think about abortion, And I said, I'm pro-choice. And I didn't expect to do that. This wasn't a planned thing. It was just this weird... I've been doing these seminars with pro-lifers, doing role play with them, helping them understand what pro-choice people sound like when they talk. And so I don't know what came over me. I just blurted out, I'm pro-choice. And he's like, oh, he's so excited. And so, why are you pro-choice? And so it's well, now I've got to pick a persona so I can stay consistent with it. And I had been working with some of my favorite pro-lifers on bodily rights arguments for the previous couple of years. This guy, awesome guy, Steve Wagner, who's here. Find Steve and talk to him. Steve Wagner and I and Trent Horn and my brother Tim especially have been spending a lot of time talking about bodily rights arguments. So I was like, oh, okay, I'll be a bodily rights guy. So I said, well, I think that a child is completely dependent on its mother's body and that she shouldn't be forced to have her body used by someone else. So that's why she should be able to have an abortion. And he said, oh, you're saying it's not a person because it's dependent. You're saying because it's dependent, it's not valuable. But that wouldn't explain personhood. There's all kinds of dependent people. And I said, no, that's not what I said. I said it is totally dependent on her body, but so now there's a special relationship between the child and her body. And so, she shouldn't be forced to be hooked up to other people. And that's why she should be able to have an abortion. And he said, you said dependency again. No, you're saying it's not, you're really confused. He said, I was confused. He said, you're confused. You're saying it's not valuable because it's in her body and completely dependent. And I said, dude, I know a few things about pro-life arguments. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it is a person, it's a person, but it's totally dependent on her body, and you shouldn't be forced to be hooked up to other people. And at this point, he knew that he'd been beat, and he just had nothing. He was just like pugs, the way pug dogs look when they're look confused, that was the look this poor kid gave. And at that moment, the leaders of the pro-life group whom I knew walked out of the cafeteria and saw me. They're like, Josh is here! And came up to give me a big hug. And now the kid is really confused. And so I held up my hand and I said, hi, I'm Josh, I'm pro-life. And he stands up and I kid you not, he says, what should I have said? So I walked him away from the exhibit, and we did like 20 minutes on bodily rights arguments. Here's the point. I had a really interesting biographical experience during that time with that kid that I wasn't expecting to have. Because I was playing a pro-choice person, and I was playing a pro-choice person as accurately as I could. And so I kind of got into the shoes of a pro-choice person. So I could, do this role play, like accurately and well. And it was really interesting to experience how frustrated I got as this kid aggressively strawmanned me. Like, I was really clear about what my argument was, clearer than most pro-choice people are. And he kept on strawmanning my argument, and by the end of it, I was getting ticked. And then as I walked off campus to my car, I had this sinking thought of, I wonder how many times I've done that to pro-choice people. I wonder how many people I've accidentally given that experience to. And I had this kind of renewed sense of, like, a kind of a vow of, like, I really want to never do that again to someone. Because it is so frustrating to have a good argument and have it treated like a stupid argument by someone who's just not listening. So I don't want us to do that. Which means when people say things like my body, my choice, or she should have a right to do whatever she wants with her body, or even it's a part of her body, we should ask a clarification question. So I'm going to the PowerPoint now. We're going to see if this works. Doesn't seem to be working. I've heard there might be tech issues, so we might not end up using, here we go. All right, so like this would be a clarification question that we might ask someone. If they say it's a part of her body, we got to find out what they mean. You can't refute them if you don't know what they mean by that. It's a part of her body could mean all kinds of things. So we're asking a question like, I want to understand you, but it sounds like you might mean one of two different things. And give them multiple choice. Say, do you mean that the fetus is not a human being, like it's a part of her body, like a kidney or like an organ? Or do you mean that it doesn't matter if it's a person because she should have the right to do whatever she wants with anything inside of her body? This is a wonderful clarification question that we got from our friends at Justice for All. And you know what? We've asked that question hundreds of times on college campuses. And you know what people say 99% of the time? The last one, the bodily rights one. Because it's a far less stupid argument. All right? Like if someone actually thinks that the unborn is like a kidney, that is the stupidest of all the options that they have in front of them. Okay, that's not a very good pro-choice argument. And I'll respond to it graciously if they say it, but most of the time, my assumption is that the person I'm talking to is not an idiot. And so I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and think they probably mean something smarter than what it sounds like they're trying to say. And so I'll ask them that and find out, and then we can go whichever direction. If they actually think it's like a kidney, then we can talk about how it has its own DNA, and all of that would be hopefully really helpful to them. But if they mean a bodily rights argument, then I want to respond to that, and that's going to require a different response than if they said something like it's not a person or it's a part of her body. So we're going to ask that clarification question. This iPad is seriously not working for me. I'm going to give up on the whole PowerPoint. You can just go on me. That's fine. It's just like for people taking notes. It's fine. So here's where we're going to go. My friend Trent Horn from Catholic Answers. Does anyone listen to Trent Horn on Catholic Answers? He's awesome, right? Okay, so the best thing Trent has ever done for the pro-life movement, in my view, is to help people understand that there are two different kinds of bodily rights arguments. This is critically important because you're going to respond differently based on which one they're making the argument on. So Trent Horn says there's a category called sovereign zone arguments, and then there's this other category called right to refuse arguments. So let's talk a little bit about sovereign zone. I'm not going to spend too much time on sovereign zone arguments because, frankly, it's the easier one to refute. You will hear it more often, but I'm going to want to spend some of my time going more advanced. So sovereign zone arguments basically say a woman has the right to do whatever she wants with anything inside of her body. A woman has the right to do whatever she wants with anything inside of her body. Now, they won't use the phrase sovereign zone, right? They're not going to say that unless they've read our paper or something. But they will say something like that. It's a part of her body, my choice, she can do whatever she wants. And so there's a couple different things that we're going to want to do if that's the argument they're making, okay? The first thing we want to show them is that their view if true, means that there should be no restrictions on abortion at all. If she can do whatever she wants with anything inside of her body, there should be no restrictions on abortion, and that is not where most pro-choice people are at. I was at a campus in Michigan recently, and I was talking we had set up this poll table, and this pro-choice woman comes up to me, and she starts off with, "Why do you want to control women's bodies?" And I'm like, okay, it's going to be this kind of a conversation. Okay. So I said, okay, I will totally answer that question, but can I ask you a question first? I want to see if we've got some common ground. She's like, okay. I said, do you think that abortion should be legal for all 9 months of pregnancy or like something less? And she's like, oh, no, just like first 20 weeks or so. I said, okay, that's a lot of pro-choice people think. That's fine. And do you think that women should be able to have abortions for any reason, or are there like some that maybe should be off the table? She's like, oh, well, it shouldn't be used for birth control. But like if she's like really poor or like she really needs it, then she should have abortion available to her. And I said, okay. So let me ask you one more question. And please hear me. I'm not trying to make fun of you. I'm just curious. Why do you want to control women's bodies? And she said, what? And I said, no, I'm just wondering. Like, you don't think third trimester abortions should be illegal? You don't think it should be illegal for people to have birth control abortions? Why are you wanting to control women's bodies? And she's like, I'm not. I said, I don't think I am either. It's a lot more complicated than that. So can we have a real discussion about abortion? Like, it's a lot more complicated than this rhetorical slogan. And she's like, well, I just feel like women should be able to do whatever they want with their bodies. And I said, okay, I'm tracking with you. It's a very common statement, but you got to understand, I don't think that works with the things that you just said. Like, you said it should not be legal for women to have third trimester abortions. I don't think that works if the way you're grounding your pro-choice beliefs is that a woman has the right to do anything she wants with anything inside of her body. She said, why? I said, because where's the baby in the third trimester? Still in her body, right? So you don't get to just say, well, like she can do whatever she wants with anything inside of her body, but then if it's the third trimester, it's not okay. No. You don't get to do that. You're going to have to pick one. Either that's the right grounding for your beliefs, and there should be no restrictions on abortion at all, or maybe there's some more nuanced view. Maybe we could talk about that. And she was like, you know what? You're right. I shouldn't be putting any restrictions on abortion. Well, I've got to go to class. This was great. Goodbye. And I'm like, wait, I wasn't finished. And my colleague Jacob Nels, who's at our booth today, you should come meet Jacob. Jacob's watching this whole thing, and he was like, wait, did you just make her more pro-choice? Like, is that a win? And we had a whole discussion about that today, that day, and we decided, yes, that's a win. You want to know why? Because she walked up to our table having an inconsistent but comfortable pro-choice position. She walked away from our booth having a consistent and uncomfortable pro-choice position. That's a win. As my brother Tim wrote in a great article on this called Bodily Rights Arguments Necessitate Extremism, he said, we want to drive the comfortable pro-choice position extinct. You're going to have to pick. You can either have the extremist view that all abortions should be legal, or you can have the, I think, very reasonable view that it's wrong to kill babies. So we're going to try to help people to understand that. So that's number one. If they say she can do whatever she wants with anything inside of her body, you got to help them understand. Then there can be no restrictions on abortion if that's true. And that is not where most pro-choice people are at. I have never seen anything make pro-choice people abandon bodily rights arguments altogether and jump to personhood than realizing that that view necessitates extremism. But if it doesn't work, there's another thing we'll try. We'll talk about thalidomide. This is something that my good friend Dr. Rich Papard was the first one to kind of help pro-life people understand that bodily rights arguments there's an issue that you can bring up by talking about thalidomide. So for those of you that don't know, thalidomide is a drug that was given to pregnant women in the late 50s, mainly in Germany, because it was thought at the time for a few years that this was going to be the best way to help pregnant women with severe morning sickness. Like it would have fewer side effects. And tragically, what no one realized until a few years later was that if you give a pregnant woman thalidomide, her baby will either die or will be born without arms and or legs. Severe fetal deformities. You are not allowed to take this if you're pregnant now But they didn't know that for a few years. And so, tragically, there were hundreds of, they're still called thalidomide babies, that were born, and now they're in their 60s or 70s, who have major deformities to their body because their mom, and it's not their mom's fault, like her doctor gave it to her, kind of a thing. But this is what happened. And so, we'll tell people about that backstory, and then we'll ask, so do pregnant women be allowed to take thalidomide to cure morning sickness? And now, of course, they're going to respond, well, you can't. It's illegal. You can't get that. It's like, okay, but let's do a thought experiment. What if she could? What if her husband's a doctor, and she's like, I've tried everything else. It's really severe. I'm like on fluids. Like I can barely keep anything down. Please, husband, go get me some thalidomide, and we'll try that. Why exactly would it be wrong for her to take that? Because most pro-choice people, their intuition is that she shouldn't be allowed to take thalidomide. Why? If she can do anything she wants with anything inside of her body, why should she not be allowed to take thalidomide? Now, what's going on for most pro-choice people is they feel like it would be wrong to cause suffering. They feel like we shouldn't cause people suffering. We shouldn't give people, all the tragic things that come with being born with severe birth defects. Like, we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't deprive someone of all these wonderful experiences of being able to run or ride bikes or whatever. But now the problem is they're now in a pretty uncomfortable position of having to say that it is worse to deprive someone of some experiences than to deprive them of all of their experiences. They're saying it would be worse to take a drug that would cause their baby to be born without arms and or legs, but it would be better for their child to be dismembered in an abortion. That's an awkward position to try to make work. But have you ever talked to people who just it takes a while for them to get it, and they get kind of stubborn? Anyone here ever talked to stubborn people before? Okay. There's another direction we'll push a little bit harder if this is not working. So what if she were to take thalidomide to intentionally deform her child? Now this, you got to do a more complicated thought experiment because people don't do that. Like no one would do that, I hope. That would be a terrible person. But what if the woman from the previous thought experiment, she has her baby, her husband gave her thalidomide, her baby was born, let's say, without legs, and then she gets pregnant again later. And she has a really good pregnancy this time. It's not so bad. She doesn't have all this morning sickness. But she starts thinking, man, it would be really unfair to my firstborn son if I have this perfect baby now. And so just in her own twisted logic, she decides to ask her husband to give her thalidomide again. Not to cure morning sickness, but to intentionally deform her child. Why would that be wrong if she should be able to do anything she wants with anything inside of her body? And this is the moment that we've seen a lot of pro-choice people have it click and have them see, okay, clearly you can't do anything you want with anything inside of your body. And then often they will jump to a better version of bodily rights arguments. This is what Trent calls right to refuse arguments, which is a softer argument. It doesn't make such a strong claim. It doesn't say that you can do anything you want with anything inside of your body, but it does say that you should at least not be forced to have your body used as life support for another person. So Judith Jarvis Thomson in 1971 publishes one of the most important papers in modern philosophy, called A Defense of Abortion. And she makes lots of thought experiments about why she's pro-choice, but by far the most famous one is the violinist thought-experiment. Who here is familiar with the violinist argument? Ooh, good, more of you, this is great. That's actually, I think, the largest percentage I've ever had, and that makes me really, really happy. I'm really glad that you've heard this, but for those of you that haven't, Thomson draws out this thought experiment where she basically says, imagine you wake up in a hospital bed, not where you went to sleep. And the first thing you notice is there's a tube coming out of your body and it's hooked up into a man in a coma in the hospital bed next to you. And of course, you're starting to freak out. And then the head of the hospital comes in and says, oh, you're awake. Oh my gosh, let me explain what's going on. Oh, I'm sorry, this is so unfair, but let me explain. Here's what's going on. The man in the bed next to you is a world-famous violinist with a kidney problem. And you were kidnapped by the Society of Music Lovers, who somehow figured out that you're a match. And they kidnapped you, and they hooked you up, and then they brought you here. And I'm really sorry. But here's the thing. The violinist is a person. He has the right to life. So we can't unplug you, or he'll die. But the good news is you only have to be plugged in for 9 months. And then he'll be viable, and you'll be able to go your merry ways. Now, think about that. Thompson argues that this is a lot like pregnancy. And most people would agree that even, like, I know some people who think it would be, like, morally obligatory to stay hooked up to the violinist. Like, out of, like, a Christian duty to love your neighbor or something like that. Certainly, it would be a very generous act to stay hooked up. It's what philosophers would call a supererogatory act. It would be like going way above and beyond the call of duty, pin a medal on that guy kind of a thing. Of course, you could choose to do that, but almost no one, either pro-life or pro-choice, believes that there should be a violinist amendment to the Constitution that says that if this ever happens, you should be handcuffed to the bed and forced to stay hooked up to the violinist. And I agree. You should not be forced to stay hooked up to the violinist. And so Thompson says, see, pro-lifers, even if you're right that it's a person, and even if you're right that it's morally wrong to have an abortion, it should clearly be legal, because we should not force women to have their bodies hooked up to other people. It would be too much of a deprivation of their bodily autonomy. Take a moment, and do you feel the weight of that argument? This is a lot better argument than just who knows when life begins. Like, this is pretty interesting. Don't worry, we've got responses. But I want you to feel, do you see how it would make sense to be pro-choice if you know this argument? I want us as pro-life people to understand pro-choice people better. And you will not understand pro-choice people, and you will not be able to change their mind if you think that you'd have to be an idiot to be pro-choice. You have to get to the point where you can understand why the pro-choice position would be reasonable to them, and then you can refute them. So, there's lots of different pro-life responses to the violinist. Let me tell you about a few, and then I'll tell you about my favorite one. One, some people talk about there's a difference between the violinist and pregnancy, which is sometimes people call this the organ use objection. In the violinist story, your kidney is hooked up to someone else with a kidney problem. But your kidneys were not designed to be hooked up to other people. They're just designed to help you. But the womb seems to be designed to help other people. Seems to be designed to help children. So it seems like maybe babies have like this right to the uterus. Now, I believe that's true. I don't believe that is going to be very persuasive very often to atheists. Why? Because atheists do not believe that your body parts were designed. They think that it's like, my eyes see. They weren't designed to see, they just do. It's really helpful. Like the process of evolution or Mother Nature or whatever made this all work, and that's great. But they're not going to draw moral and certainly not legal obligations from the fact that your eyes just happen to work. And so if you're talking to a pro-choice Christian, absolutely go here. It'll be really helpful. But most atheists that I talk to, this doesn't change their mind. It doesn't mean it's not a true argument, but I'm interested in not only what is true, but also what changes minds. I want to figure out what changes minds the most often. So this is not where I go. A lot of pro-life people talk about how there's a really big disanalogy. I just went through puberty. There's a big disanalogy between where there's a parent versus stranger difference. There's, in the violinist story, you're hooked up to a stranger. That's not what's going on with pregnancy. You're hooked up to your own child. And clearly, you have stronger obligations to your own children than you do a stranger. I think that's true. I don't think it solves the problem for pro-life people, though. Here's why. If I was pro-choice, I would just say, fine, change the violinist story. It's your long-lost son. The head of hospital resident says, hey, by the way, while you were asleep or in a coma or whatever, we did a 23andMe test. And surprise, it's your boy. It's your son is there. It's like a long-lost violin-playing son. I don't think this solves the problem. I think you're a worse person if you unplug, because you do have stronger obligations to your children. But I don't think even in that case you should be handcuffed to the bed. I don't think you should be forced to donate your organs to people. Now, I don't think pregnancy is like that, and I'll talk about that, but that's kind of where I'm coming from. So that's not it. I think the direction you want to go is what we call the responsibility objection. And real quick, I'm just going to say, it's a quick just tangent. If Andrew from my staff is here, I need you to go to our booth and bring me the iPad. It's hooked up into the square stand. You're going to have to unplug it and bring it to me because it's got that cool thing you guys figured out that I'm going to say at the end. Okay, so responsibility objection. There he goes. He's running. Okay, that's awesome. You should meet Andrew. He's this brilliant philosophy guy. We just brought him. This is his first week, is going to the Students for Life conference in March for Life. It's so cool. Okay, responsibility objection. There is a very important disanalogy between the violinist story and pregnancy. This is the first thing I actually say if someone brings up the violinist argument. Ready? I'm glad. The soul person, yes, I'm ready. Give it to me. Okay. In the violinist story, you were kidnapped and hooked up to this guy. That is not how pregnancy typically begins. Okay? So here's the responsibility objection. When you have consensual sex, you're engaging in an act that you know might result in the creation of an inherently needy child that you owe compensation to. Let me say that again. When you have consensual sex, you're engaging in an act that you know might result in the creation of an inherently needy child. Let me explain a thought experiment that kind of gets into that. We got this from Frank Beckwith. So imagine, and by the way, this is why the wrong pro-life response to the violinist is, well, that's just weird. That's not a good response. This is a thought experiment. I know we don't have the technology to do that. It doesn't matter. We're trying to figure out what our intuitions ought to be. And thought experiments about pregnancy tend to be really weird. Why? Because pregnancy is weird. There is nothing in our universe like pregnancy. So you get these weird science fiction kinds of stories where people are hooked up to other people, and it's just odd. And so that's what happens. Come on, you're fine. Say hi to Andrew, everybody. Thanks. And go away now. No. Okay. So let me give you also a weird thought experiment. Imagine a room with a baby-making machine on it, okay? It's like a big Coke machine. It's got a big button on it, and there's a chute at the bottom, like a Coke machine. And if you push the big button, you have a very pleasurable experience. But every once in a while, a baby will pop out. Are you tracking with me? We just simplified pregnancy. Are we on the same page? Okay, good. Now, here's the point. Imagine a guy walks up to the baby-making machine because he wants to have this pleasurable experience. He does not want a baby to come out. This is like a gamble for him. He's rolling the dice. He does not want like a quiver full, okay? But he decides to push the button anyway. A few of you got that. He decides to push the button anyway, and from his perspective, he lost. A baby does come out. It seems really obvious that he can't just walk. He can't just walk away and have the baby starve to death. And it seems even more obvious he can't like bash his brains in. Why? Because he pushed the button. In other words, he engaged in an act that he knew might result in the creation of an inherently needy child that he now owes compensation to. So he needs to either care for this child or he needs to transfer that care to someone else, like adoption. That's fine. But it is morally important that he push the button. He's the reason this baby's there. Now, I was talking to a guy at Fresno State University one time, and we're talking about bodily rights arguments, and he's going through, he's like, it seems like you shouldn't be forced to be hooked up to other people, and then I've never seen this happen before. He actually responsibility objectioned himself. I didn't even have to do it. He just like worked it out. He was like, oh, wait, that wouldn't work if she consented to the sex, would it? I'm like, now I'm just like watching the show. Or like, okay, so what would you say to you, you know? And he's like, oh, man, I don't know. Like he's like got himself stuck in a corner, right? And so I'm going to like try to help him out. And I let him like think about it for like 10 seconds, like see if he could work it out, because that would have been cool. But he didn't. So I was like, okay, well, are there any cases of pregnancy where that argument wouldn't apply? And he immediately knew, rape. And I said, right. So what would you say then? He said, I don't know, you're the pro-lifer. So I said, well, here's what I would say. Notice something about this argument. Now we've combined the violinist with the tragic situation of rape. When you do this, I believe you now have the strongest pro-choice argument. We call right to refuse in the case of rape, the triple R. This is the toughest one. So we're going to take the rest of our time and talk about how to respond to this. Who here has seen the movie Up? Oh, wow. Okay. Has anyone not seen Up? Oh, no. Oh, guys. That's messed up. Like, okay, you got to understand. Like, it's not even just a movie. It's art, okay? Like, you have to see Up. It's really, really good. It's got everything you could want. It's got talking golden retrievers and flying houses. Like, what else do you want? Okay. Well, I want to help you understand where we're going to go by talking. So I'm going to spoil the first 15 minutes of Up. It's your fault. You're 9 years too late. Like, you should have watched this by now. I won't spoil the end though. It's really, you need to watch it. Okay. So it starts off Carl, this kind of, this older man. He's been married his whole life, and in the first couple of minutes of the movie, his wife dies. It gets better. Okay. So now he's this kind of grumpy old widower, and he's just living in this little house that he and his wife grew up in. And then this Boy Scout comes up, this kid named Russell, and he's really obnoxious. Carl doesn't want to have anything to do with him. But then there's this other thing going on where the government is trying to take over his home because of eminent domain. And so he does, I really appreciate about this movie, I appreciate the realism. So what Carl does is he ties thousands of balloons to the house to get away. And at the right moment, he cuts from the foundation, the house just lifts off and just flies. So he can fly to South America, where he and his wife had always dreamed of vacationing. It's a great movie. You should go see it. But here's the thing. After he's been flying for a while, he hears a knock at the door, which is not what you expect. I don't know if it's the last time you were flying 1,000 feet up in the air, but you don't expect a knock at the door. So he opens the door, and there's Russell. He's he's terrified. It's against there's a porch, all right? So he's in mortal danger. I don't know why it took so long to knock on the door. It's kind of dumb. But finally he decides to knock on the door. Can I come in? And of course, Carl lets him in, and they go on. There's no implication that he doesn't have enough food. It's not a threat to his life or anything like that. So he lets him in, and they go on to have adventures together, and Russell basically drives him crazy for the rest of the movie. You should totally go see it. It's great. Here's the thing. Let's imagine for a second, all of us, that when they were making the movie Up, that Pixar decided to take this movie a much darker direction. Let's say the house lands and there's no Boy Scout on it. And the police show up and say, hey, there are witnesses. Have you seen a Boy Scout? And he says, yeah, he was on my porch. And they say, so where is he now? He's like, well, my property, my choice. Guess he fell off. What should happen to him? It seems like he should go to jail. But why? He's not his grandfather. He's not biologically related. There must be something else going on here. And this is something that my brother Tim and Steve Wagner were talking about one time. They started thinking, what is that relationship there? And they started thinking of Carl as Russell's de facto guardian. Meaning, for a limited amount of time, because of some really weird circumstances, Carl became the only adult in the geographic vicinity of a child. The only adult near a child that could help this child to not die through basic care, food and shelter. So there's some things that Carl's not obligated to do for Russell. This is going to get really dark. This piece is going to get progressively darker with the thought experiment, so just warning you. If they were starving, if Russell was starving, I don't think Carl is obligated to cut his hand off and feed it to Russell. There's certain things Carl doesn't have to do, right? But basic food and shelter, I think clearly he has that obligation until he can transfer that care back to his parents. And that's what we started thinking is going on with women who are pregnant as a result of rape. We're trying to take our hands and tie them behind our back and still participate in a fight. I think that she's a parent in a meaningful sense. But when we talk about which arguments are most persuasive, I'll tell you what's not persuasive. Trying to convince a pro-choice college student that a woman who's pregnant from rape is a mother in a meaningful sense. I think she is, but that's not the most persuasive direction to go. So We're tying that hand behind her back. The responsibility thing is out because she didn't push the button. And again, I don't think the organ use objection is going to be persuasive if it's an atheist, so what do we do? So we started thinking of her as a de facto guardian. So we came up with this thought experiment. Imagine a woman wakes up in a cabin in a blizzard, not where she went to sleep. She had a baby just 3 weeks ago, so her maternal instinct kicks in. She's freaking out. She's got to find her baby. She is in this cabin. It's like a 2-bedroom cabin, like a small kind of like a log cabin. And clearly snow is like piled up to here. She's snowed in for some time. She gets out of the first bedroom. She sees a little circular dining room table with a note on it. And it says 3 things. It says, 1, you're safe and your baby is too. 2, there's plenty of food, water, and baby formula in the kitchen. And 3, what was the other thing? It's been so long. You'll be, no, I'll get to that in a minute. Okay, so let's just say it just says those things. And she's like, there's plenty of food and water and baby formula. And she sees there's like a Costco level supply of baby formula on the counter. She's like, maybe my baby's here. And the baby starts crying in the other bedroom. She thinks, maybe my baby's here. She runs into the bedroom and she sees not her baby, a stranger baby. Because she was kidnapped by a group of rogue philosophers who just got to this point where they're like, we just want to stop doing thought experiments and we want to do experiments. So they've been tying people onto trolley tracks, all kinds of things. And they decided to kidnap her and like see what would happen. So like there's like hidden cameras and stuff. And so we wanted to see what she would do. Now, let's say the police find the cabin. Oh yeah, the other thing the note said, you'll be here for 9 months. That's what the other thing said. You'll be here for 9 months. So the police find the cabin, let's say 6 weeks later, and they're like, are you okay? And her hair is all disheveled, she's like, oh, I think I'm okay. It's like, I'm really sorry it took so long, we've been on the case for weeks. By the way, we heard baby, is there a baby here? And she says, there was a baby here. There was a baby here? It's like, yeah, it's in there. And they go into the second bedroom and find a dead baby. And they said, what happened? And she said, I was just so stressed out, I couldn't feed it. Do you think that she's morally obligated to bottle feed that baby? Yeah. So, and like, do you think she should even be legally obligated to bottle feed that baby? Think so. So then you could change the thought experiment. What if you take away all the baby formula? What if the only way for her to feed the baby was to breastfeed it? She's lactating, she just had a baby. What if that was the only way to feed the baby? And then the police come 6 weeks later and the baby's dead. You can start talking to the pro-choice person about this idea. Like, is she morally obligated to breastfeed the baby, to use her body to support this child? And I think it's really important for you to go one more step. What if the note said 4 things? What if the note said, you're here, you're safe, and your baby is too. You'll be here for 9 months. There's plenty of food and water in the kitchen. And if the child dies, you'll be rescued immediately. In fact, what if the note says, you must kill the baby in a way that is analogous to a surgical abortion? We've left you a set of instructions and instruments. And what if she does? What if the police come and they find a dismembered baby? Or what if she dismembers it and she's rescued and then the police find out about it? Should she go to jail? You better believe it. Do you see how obvious it is? This is one of the things we have to bring in. We have to bring in the side of abortion that is intentional killing. It is really, really obvious you cannot intentionally kill people. And the reason I asked Andrew to bring me this iPad is because as I close up the talk and give you a couple of resources, our awesome philosophy team worked really hard a couple of days ago while I was at a different conference writing up some new things they wanted me to tell you. I've only read it once, but it's brand new. This is like what I like to do. I like to get some of the best minds in the pro-life movement and get them together in a room and let them be awesome together. So I want to tell you what they said, that what they wanted you to know. We want to bring more philosophical clarity to this than we ever have before. There are 2 common pro-choice responses to this idea. One, you can't even force someone to donate their blood. And that's not asking that much, but you think you can force people to be pregnant. That's one. Another one is that RE46 looks like unplugging. Maybe surgical abortion is clearly not unplugging, but RE46, a medical abortion, chemical abortion, looks a lot like unplugging. So maybe the violinist story would apply in that case. And to respond to those arguments, we want to explain the two biggest problems with all bodily rights arguments. Are you ready? You got to stay with me. This is the two biggest problems. One, bodily rights arguments claim that abortion is not intentional killing, that it's merely not helping someone. Abortion is not merely deciding to not save someone. Abortion is killing someone. Now, sometimes people can get lost in the distinctions between killing versus letting die. And there are some philosophical cases that are kind of confusing. But here's what's not confusing. If I'm dying of a kidney problem, and I asked Autumn, the girl who introduced me, to give me her kidney, to donate her kidney to me, and she decides not to do it, has she killed me? Clearly not. But if Autumn took a gun and shot me in the head, did she kill me? Yes, that is really obvious. Bodily rights arguments always make this mistake. Whether it's blood donation, a famous violinist in a hospital, or anything else, it always pretends that abortion is not killing someone. They act like abortion is just deciding to not help someone. It isn't. And that is why blood donation is different. You have the right to not help people. You do not have the right to kill people, even when they're inconvenient. Abortion is a brutal act that destroys an unborn child. And some abortion procedures are more obviously intentional killing than others, but they are all intentional killing. We interviewed a medical expert to ask him exactly what happens to an embryo who is killed through RU46. In what order, exactly what happens. You know what he said? The first thing that happens, it asphyxiates to death. You're cutting it off from its supply of oxygen. And then it's expelled into an unsafe environment. It's not like choosing to not help a baby. It would be like dropping a baby into a lake after smothering it. That's killing. Now, pro-choice people and even some pro-life people feel like RE46 is a less direct form of killing, and that makes it okay. This is the most philosophical we're going to go. Stay with me. They feel like RE46 is a less direct form of killing than that, and that makes it okay. They are wrong. RE46 is a less direct form of killing, but that doesn't make it okay. We're going to do a couple of dark thought experiments now, okay? Andrew, the guy who came up and gave me the iPad. If I kill Andrew with a rock, that's a little bit less direct than if I just hit him with my fist over and over, right? If I was scuba diving with Andrew, and I took away his scuba mask and they drowned, that's less direct than killing him with a rock. But I don't get to act like it's not killing. It is still killing. There is no way to just unplug, violinist style, an embryo or a pre-viable fetus without cutting it up or smothering and starving it. The only way to get rid of a pre-viable embryo or fetus is to kill it. You have to be able to explain this to pro-choice people. And this might feel unfair to them. It might feel unfair because in the violinist story, you can just unplug. And that's not the case with pregnancy. But if you change the violinist story where the only way to unplug is to dismember the violinist with a machete, no one feels okay about that. Secondly, bodily rights arguments pretend that a healthy fetus is like a sick person who's dying from a kidney disease. And you might be wondering, why does that distinction matter? I'll tell you. There are always differences when people make thought experiments, but often they aren't relevant. But it matters that pro-choice bodily rights analogies like the violinist always use a sick person as a stand-in for the healthy fetus. Why? Because when a healthy person winds up dead in a medical thought experiment, it isn't because you didn't save them. The violinist story can pretend that abortion isn't killing because you aren't doing anything to the violinist. You're just not helping him. So when he dies, that isn't on your head. By contrast, abortion takes a perfectly healthy but vulnerable life and it intentionally snuffs it out. Pro-choice people need to stop playing games. They need to stop pretending that abortion is just the refusal of assistance to an embryo. It's not. When you do a medical procedure on a healthy person and afterward they're dead, you don't get to act like you didn't cause that death. If the violinist dies because you unplug, what is it that kills him? His kidney disease. But if a pregnant woman has a surgical abortion, what is it that kills the embryo or fetus? Dismemberment. If a pregnant woman has RE46, what kills the embryo or fetus? Asphyxiation. They're different. So, with my final couple of minutes, let me just tell you a couple of resources I want to tell you about. If this was a little bit confusing, that's okay. This is a kind of advanced philosophy. So we have a course that we made for Students for Life groups. If you go to equippedcourse.com, you can get a course. Some of you already have it. I see your faces. This talk is on that course. If you go to our booth, I was right kind of in front of the front doors when you walked in, we're giving a 25% discount on that course. And we just made it so it's no longer an annual membership. It's permanent. You buy it once, you have it for life. So we want to help you with that, to be equipped to go into your college campuses. One other thing I want to tell you about, besides obviously follow us on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and YouTube and iTunes and all that stuff. We've got all those things. But there's one brand new tool I want to tell you about really quickly. We just created on our website a conversation counter tool. I want to encourage a wave across this country of pro-life people that are willing to get off their couch and go have conversations with pro-choice people. Do you want to be part of that movement? Okay. Here's what we're going to do for you. If you go to equalrightsinstitute.com/counter, you're going to take a quick little survey. You're going to give us your contact info. We haven't created the survey yet, but here's what we're going to be making in the next few weeks. A place for you to go whenever you have a conversation about abortion. And we'll ask you a couple of questions. What came up in the conversation? You fill in the blank. Did you have anything that they said that you struggled with a bit? And then you will get individualized help from an ERI team member on that conversation. And we're going to count the conversation and try to use that number and celebrate that number of how many conversations are going on all over America because pro-life students are now willing to talk about abortion with pro-choice people. I want you to be part of that movement. So go to equalrightsinstitute.com/counter and we will email you as soon as the survey tool is ready. If you have had any conversations this month about abortion or if you're planning on it, get on that email list so we can let you know we've got the counter tool ready and we want to give you personal help from an ERI team member. God bless you. Go abolish abortion.